At my brother's birthday party, my own mother called me the help. She said it with a laugh in front of everyone while I was passing out cake. People chuckled like it was harmless, like I should be used to it. But then my 8-year-old son tugged my hand, looked up at me and whispered, "Can I say something?" Before I could stop him, he climbed onto a chair, held up a folded note, and started reading. The room fell silent. Nobody laughed after that. I never expected much from my family. Not praise, not affection, not even kindness. Just the bare minimum. A seat at the table, a moment of acknowledgement, maybe a little space to be myself. But even that seemed like too much to ask most days. My name is Lena Hartley. I am 35, a single mom, and I've been raising my son, Micah, on my own since he was 2. Life isn't glamorous. We don't have a backyard or granite countertops, but I've managed to build something solid. I work 2 jobs. I stretch paychecks. I put everything I have into making sure Micah feels seen, safe, and loved. It's a quiet kind of life, and honestly, I like it that way. But then the invitation came. My older brother, Grayson, was throwing a birthday dinner at our parents' house. Or rather, my mother was throwing it for him. A sit-down meal, catered, just family, and a few close friends, she said on the phone. She made it sound casual, but I knew better. Nothing my mother, Dolores Hartley, ever does is casual. She's the type who irons pillowcases and keeps a standing hair appointment like it's a court summons. She's always had a vision of how her family should look. Polished, proper, a little performative. And Grayson, he fits that image like a glove. Tall, charming, successful. He's a real estate agent with a white smile and a lake house. The golden boy. The one who made her proud. Then there's me. Growing up, I was the one cleaning up the kitchen while he got praised for microwaving popcorn. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who didn't need much. But I did. I just stopped asking. Over time, I learned my place in that house. Not the favorite, not even close. Still, when Micah saw the invitation on the fridge and asked, "Are we going to Uncle Grayson's party?" I said yes, not for me, for him. I didn't want my bitterness to become his. He deserves to know his family, even if I have to hold my breath to walk back into it. We arrived a little early that day. Micah wore the button-up shirt I picked out, hair slicked back, smile wide. He always tries to be on his best behavior around my mother, though he doesn't quite understand why she's so different from the warm women he sees on TV. Dolores opened the door with a tight-lipped smile. Her hug was brief, and I could tell she was already scanning the room for something to fix. "Oh, Lena, perfect timing," she said, handing me a stack of paper napkins. "Can you help with these? The caterers put the wrong ones out. And make sure Micah doesn't run around too much." Grayson invited a few clients. "No. Hello. No. I'm glad you're here. Just instructions." Like I'd shown up for a shift. I glanced at Micah. He looked up at me confused. I forced a smile and said, "Sure, Mom. No problem." The house looked like a magazine spread. Table settings, wine glasses, the smell of roast lamb and rosemary. Grayson was already holding court in the living room, telling some story about a celebrity client. People laughed like he was the most interesting man on earth. He spotted me, waved and shouted, "Hey sis, you made it." It was the only time he acknowledged me that night. Micah and I sat at the far end of the long table, across from a couple I didn't recognize. No one really spoke to us. I asked Micah what he wanted from the buffet, and he whispered, "Can we just go home after cake?" I squeezed his hand under the table and nodded. I could already feel it, tightness in my chest, the old ache in my stomach. Being in that house was like stepping back into a version of myself I'd outgrown. The quiet girl who didn't speak up, who made herself small, who carried plates while her brother was handed trophies. Still, I kept smiling because I didn't want Micah to see me retreat. I didn't want him to inherit this weight. So, I stayed seated, passing the salad, nodding at Dolores's compliments about Grayson's latest business deal. I laughed when the table laughed, even though none of it was funny. I swallowed down that familiar feeling like it was part of the meal. I just had no idea how loud things were about to get. The party should have been winding down. Dinner plates had been cleared, and the buzz of wine and conversation hung heavy in the air. I watched Micah push around a piece of roasted carrot on his plate, his little shoulders drawn in like he was trying to disappear. He kept glancing at me, sensing something was off. He always knows before I say a word. I stood to gather our plates, just to give myself something to do. As I walked toward the kitchen, I passed by my mother, who was rearranging the gift table for the third time. She glanced up at me without really looking. "Lena, since you're already up, could you bring out the cake?" she said like she was assigning a task to a waitress. I hesitated. "Sure," I said quietly, even though every part of me wanted to say no. But the kitchen felt safer than the spotlight, and saying no always seemed to escalate things. So I disappeared behind the swinging door, took a deep breath, and grabbed the cake from the fridge. A three-tiered monstrosity covered in blue and silver fondant, with Grayson's name piped across the top like he was being knighted. I lit the candles, carried it out carefully. People applauded as I entered the dining room, like I was part of the act. As I placed it on the table, my mother raised her glass and called out, "Lena, you should serve the cake. You've always been such a great helper." Laughter. Polite, casual, unbothered. Someone said, "Looks like you missed your calling." Another voice, "Hey Lena, is there coffee too?" I looked at my brother. He smirked and said, "You always did have that hostess with the mostest vibe." More laughter. In that moment, I wasn't a guest, I wasn't a sister, I wasn't a daughter. I was staff, background, an unpaid extra in someone else's story. My mother smiled like she'd just delivered the perfect punchline, the kind of smile she wears when she's feeling particularly pleased with herself, like she'd just put me back in my place. Micah was staring at me, eyes wide and unblinking. His little hands clenched the edges of his chair. I tried to smile at him to make it okay, but I could feel my face trembling. I picked up the knife, started slicing the cake, plate after plate, chocolate, vanilla, more chocolate. I kept my eyes down, kept moving, like if I stopped I'd fall apart. Then I felt a gentle tug on my shirt. "Micah." He pulled me down so he could whisper. "Mom," he said, "can I say something?" I shook my head quickly, barely able to speak. "Not now, baby." His voice was quiet but steady. "Please, I wrote something. I brought it just in case." I looked at him. He was holding a folded piece of paper in his small hands. He had written it in pencil, the edges worn soft like he'd been reading it over and over again. I didn't know what was on it, but I knew Micah. I knew that look. He was serious. He whispered again, "Can I do it now?" I nodded before I even knew why. Maybe because I didn't have the energy to say no. Maybe because some part of me wanted him to speak for both of us. He pushed his chair back, stood up on it carefully, and held the note high above his head like it was something sacred. People turned. Conversation stopped. Grayson frowned. My mother's eyes narrowed. Micah cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, voice trembling slightly. "I wrote something I want to say about my mom." I reached out instinctively, but he was already reading. "My mom works 2 jobs. She still reads to me every night. She doesn't get fancy clothes or time to go on trips, but she always makes me feel important. Even when she's tired, she smiles at me. She always shows up. She listens to me. She makes everything okay, even when people are mean to her. My mom is not the help, she's the hero." The room froze. Nobody laughed. Not one word. Forks stayed midair. My mother looked like someone had thrown a glass of cold water in her face. Grayson blinked, stunned. Micah's hands trembled as he folded the note back up. He looked around the room and said, "So please stop treating her like she doesn't matter." I was already crying silently, holding a dessert plate like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. He stepped down and walked over to me. I dropped to one knee and hugged him tightly. I didn't move at first. Micah had just read his note, his tiny voice cutting through a room full of adults who suddenly had nothing to say. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. A chair creaked somewhere behind me. That was it. No one knew what to do with the silence he'd created. He climbed down from the chair, walked over, and slid his arms around my waist. I wrapped my arms around him so tightly I could feel his heartbeat against mine. I wanted to disappear into that hug, stay there forever. It was the safest I'd felt all night. Still holding him, I looked around the room. My brother sat with his mouth slightly open, like he was about to speak, but couldn't find the words. His wife, Lexi, looked deeply uncomfortable, eyes darting between her plate and her lap. A few guests I didn't even know looked away, pretending to fix their silverware or sip wine that had long gone warm. Someone cleared their throat, and it sounded too loud. My mother was the only one who held eye contact. Dolores Hartley, still seated at the head of the table, arms folded, her lips pressed so tightly they had turned white. Her expression was unreadable, but I recognized the flicker behind her eyes. Embarrassment, maybe even shame. But if I knew her, and I did, it was quickly being replaced by anger. Not at herself for being cruel, but at me for letting this happen, for allowing the silence to break, for giving Micah the space to speak. I could feel her judgment like a spotlight. That's when the decision started to form in me. Not a loud, angry decision, not even one I fully understood in the moment. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was simply this. I wasn't going to stand there and take it anymore. Not in front of my son. Not in front of myself. I stood up slowly, holding Micah's hand. "Thank you," I whispered to him. Then I looked straight at my mother. My voice didn't shake this time. "I came here because I thought maybe things would be different. Because I thought maybe my son deserved to know his family. But I won't let him think this is what family means." Dolores opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. "You've been treating me like I'm background noise for as long as I can remember, but I'm not invisible. I'm not your helper. I'm not something to be managed. And I'm definitely not going to let you teach my son that this is how you treat people you're supposed to love." She scoffed. "Lena, it was a joke. You're being dramatic." Micah stepped closer to me and said clearly, "It wasn't funny." That shut her up. Grayson finally stood up and tried to play peacekeeper. "Come on, Lena. Let's not make this a thing. It's my birthday. Let's just—" I looked at him. "Exactly. It's your birthday. And you watched Mom humiliate me again. You laughed again. And you didn't say one word when your nephew stood up for someone you've never bothered to." His mouth opened then shut. He had nothing. I turned to the room. "Thank you for the dinner," I said, "but we're leaving." Micah clutched my hand, proud and quiet. I could feel his energy, calm, confident, like he knew he had done something important. We walked out together, past the dining room, through the kitchen, and toward the front door. No one followed. No one called my name. Just the sound of our footsteps on polished floors and the sharp click of my mother's heels on marble tile as she walked behind us, but didn't speak. When we stepped outside, the air hit my skin like freedom. Micah looked up at me as I opened the car door. "Did I mess up?" he asked. I shook my head. "You saved me," he smiled. Small, proud, the kind of smile that stays with you. As I buckled him in, I realized something else. I hadn't just left the party, I had walked away from an old version of myself. The one who tolerated silence. The one who accepted crumbs and called it a meal. That girl was gone, and she wasn't coming back. The ride home was quiet, but not in a heavy way. Micah stared out the window, his reflection flickering in the glass. Street lights slid across his face like slow-moving stars. And I just watched him, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my lap, still tingling from where he had held it. I couldn't stop replaying his words in my head. "She's not the help. She's the hero." No one had ever said something like that about me. Not out loud, not in front of a crowd, not without hesitation or apology. And it came from an 8-year-old. My 8-year-old. I didn't just feel proud. I felt seen. Really fully seen for the first time in a long time. When we got home, I tucked Micah into bed and sat on the edge of the mattress while he arranged his stuffed animals like they were watching over him. "Mom," he asked softly, "are you mad at Grandma?" I thought about that. "I'm tired of being hurt by her," I said. "And I'm proud of you. You were brave tonight." He nodded once. "I didn't want them to keep making you feel small." My throat tightened. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "You reminded me I'm not small," I said. "Not even a little." After he fell asleep, I walked into the living room and sat down with a blanket and a cup of tea. Still in my dress shoes, my hair falling out of its bun. I unfolded the note he'd read at the table. He had slipped it into my purse without saying a word. The pencil marks were faint, like he'd erased and rewritten parts over and over. The last line caught me in the chest again. "Please stop treating her like she doesn't matter." There was no anger in his voice when he read it. No spite, just truth. And truth, spoken with love, is the most powerful kind of protest. I didn't cry when he read it at the table, but I cried then, quietly in the stillness of our small living room, surrounded by hand-me-down furniture and framed pictures Micah had drawn in school. I cried because the little girl inside me, the one who never fought back, finally felt like she didn't have to. The next morning, I woke up to a string of unread texts. The first was from my mother. "We need to talk. Call me." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the same clipped voice she always used when she wanted to move past something without addressing it. I didn't respond. Grayson had texted too. "Micah's got guts. Honestly, didn't know what to say. Hope you're good." I stared at that message for a long time. It was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd ever seen from him. But it still didn't feel like enough. Because here's what I realized. For years I had hoped that if I just kept showing up, kept being helpful, kept making things easier for everyone else, they would eventually love me for who I was. That maybe one day I'd be enough to earn a seat at the table. Not as an afterthought, not as the help, but as someone who mattered. That day never came until Micah stood on that chair. In a room full of adults, he was the only one brave enough to say the truth out loud. And somehow in doing that, he didn't just defend me, he healed something in me. He reminded me that my worth doesn't depend on how many people clap for me at dinner. It doesn't live in my mother's approval or my brother's attention. My worth is in the way I love, the way I show up, the way I keep going, even when I'm tired, even when I'm overlooked. Micah saw that, and he made sure everyone else did too. I haven't called my mother back yet. Maybe I will. Maybe I won't. I haven't decided if I need closure or if I've already gotten it from my son's voice, echoing through a room full of people who finally stopped laughing. But this I know. I walked into that party thinking I was powerless. I walked out knowing I had raised a boy who sees me clearly and values me out loud. And there was no greater victory than that. 2 days after the party, I stood in the kitchen staring at the same fridge that had once held the invitation to Grayson's birthday dinner. I hadn't taken it down yet. It was still there, perfectly centered, like it belonged. I stared at it for a moment, then quietly reached up and removed it, folding it once and sliding it into the trash without ceremony. Micah sat at the kitchen table doing math homework. He had his tongue sticking out slightly, the way he always did when concentrating. I watched him for a moment. This small boy who had changed something so big, with just a piece of paper and a few brave words. He looked up and smiled. That smile reminded me why I could never go back to the way things were. Later that evening, I opened my journal and slipped the note he'd read at the party between the pages. I didn't want it to sit crumpled in a drawer or lost under papers. It deserved its place. That note wasn't just a defense of me. It was a declaration of the life I had built quietly and without applause, but with so much heart. In the days that followed, more messages came in. One of Grayson's friends, a woman named Meredith, sent me a Facebook message. We'd never spoken more than a polite hello before. "I just wanted to say," she wrote, "your son is amazing." That moment really hit me. I saw a little bit of myself in what he said. "Thank you for raising a boy who speaks truth with kindness." I stared at that message for a long time. It meant more than she probably knew. Then came another text from my father. "Micah reminded me of you when you were little. I should have stood up more back then. I'm sorry." That one made me cry. And then there was my mother, Dolores. She didn't call. She didn't write. She sent one more message a week later. "When you're ready to talk, I'd like to understand what happened better. Maybe I haven't been fair." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A small crack in a wall that had been there for decades. I didn't reply right away, because here's the truth. I wasn't angry anymore, I was just done. Done trying to earn love that should have been mine freely. Done twisting myself into someone more likable, more palatable, more convenient. I wasn't going to filter myself to fit into a family narrative that only ever centered someone else's success while erasing my survival. Micah had rewritten that story in a single evening, and in doing so, he gave me permission to stop shrinking. I started making small changes. I deleted the family group chat. I unsubscribed from trying to impress people who barely saw me. I stopped explaining my choices. I started asking myself what I actually wanted, instead of what would keep the peace. And peace came, not from them, but from within. Micah still asks about the party sometimes. Not in a sad way, more like he's trying to piece together what happened, like it was a dream he can't fully decode. "Do you think they're mad?" I said something, he asked once while brushing his teeth. I knelt down beside him. "I think the truth makes people uncomfortable sometimes, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be said." He looked relieved. "Okay, I just didn't want you to be mad at me." I pulled him into a hug. You didn't embarrass me, I said. You honored me. That's the lesson I carry with me now. When you stand up for someone who's always been expected to stay quiet, you give them back their voice. I've spent most of my life trying to belong somewhere that never made space for me. But maybe I was never meant to blend in. Maybe I was meant to build something new, with honesty, with softness, with the boy who believes in his mother more than anything else in the world. I may have walked out of that party alone with my son, but we walked into a new chapter, one where love isn't conditional, where respect isn't a performance, and where silence is no longer the price of being included. I used to want my mother to speak up for me. I used to dream of Grayson defending me. But that night, it was Micah who stood. And sometimes it takes the smallest voice to say the biggest thing. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt unseen, underestimated, or like you had to earn love that should have been unconditional, then I hope Micah's words reminded you of something important. You matter. You always did. And maybe, like me, you've needed someone to stand up and say it out loud. Or maybe you're finally ready to say it for yourself. If this story resonated with you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts, your stories, or even just how it made you feel. And if you want more true, raw, and healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me keep telling the kind of stories that often go unheard, but never go unfelt.